excuse me, but where are you? All right, so just a reminder to everyone that the meeting is being recorded and transcribed. Let's see, I need to get back to my people list. All right, so let's see. Task Force Committee members present: Jennifer Morrison.
Yes.
Ron Kumitz.
Yes.
Paul White.
Yes. Good morning.
Jim Mack.
Yes.
Michael Wright.
Yes, good morning.
All right, and so those are the only Task Force Committee name members that I see, and then I have members of the public. Mandy Wooster.
Good morning.
Corey Chase.
Good morning.
And then I have an individual, looks like they have a phone number. The last 4 digits are 6687.
I think that's
that,
probably Mr. Whitaker.
I think that's Steve Whitaker.
Probably. And I know he comes in by phone, and sometimes he has an issue with his audio. So also he doesn't have to announce himself. So those are, oh, and I'm Sonny Johnson, E911 board clerk and acting task force clerk today because Callie was not available. Oh, and I think that Mike is here.
Well, Sony, I would be happy to announce myself, but I'm not sure what my phone number is, and I'm not sure how you get it because it's blocked on my phone. So if you're getting it through some illicit trick, I'd like to know about it.
I'm not 100% sure, Stephen, that it's a phone number that's showing up. It's just a series of digits.
All right, thanks.
So, all right, and so Mike, you just joined.
I am here.
All right, okay, that is now everyone who is logged into the meeting.
Thank you, Sonny. All right. Knowing that we have a quorum with 6 out of 7 members present, we'd move on to the next item, which is approval of the agenda. And just to be clear, the agenda, following approval of the agenda, we have approval of minutes for 3 meetings, and then an update on the status of the Independent Legal Counsel RFP. The next item is pilot project considerations and goals. What does success look like? We have public comment, and then we have new business and setting the next meeting date and adjournment. Does anyone have any suggestions for changing the agenda?
Would you take a suggestion from a non-task force member?
Normally, no, but I'm happy to hear what you have to say, Stephen.
Just that you put public comment before the pilot projects, because I think my comments will be ineffective afterwards. That might inform the discussion a little bit.
Do I have a suggestion from a task force member to move public comment? We can move it to directly after approval of minutes, if somebody would like to suggest that.
I'm happy to suggest that. I have no objection.
Okay, very good. So Sonny, can you make sure we represent that we have changed the order of play here to include public comment directly following the approval of the minutes?
Yes.
Thank you. Hearing no other suggestions from task force members, we'll go ahead and move to approval of the minutes from 2 regular meetings. Those are meeting number 8 held on September 11th and regular meeting number 9 held on September 27th, as well as special meeting number 5 held on October 3rd.
Are you good with doing them all at once?
I am, if the team is.
I'll
And
motion to approve. Oh, sorry, Paul. Didn't mean to cut
No,
you.
that's okay. Mike can make a motion to approve all 3, and I'll second that.
Yeah.
Very good. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving those 3 mentioned sets of meeting minutes, please signify by raising your hand or saying aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, I believe that was 6-0, Sonny, but I actually don't have I'm looking at the agenda, not at everybody's faces right now.
Yep, I got it all. Everyone raised their hands or spoke or did both with the The little emo-
overachieving, doing both. Very good. Outstanding. Excellent. Then under the newly restructured agenda, we will open the floor to public comment, to any members of the public who wish to provide comment, feedback, suggestions. Not being sure how many people are interested, I will suggest that speakers keep their remarks to 5 minutes. We can consider going beyond that if there's not too many speakers. So with that, I know Mr. Whitaker wishes to speak. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak to us today? Okay, hearing none, take it away, Mr. Whitaker.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to the pilot project issue and just give you some of my thinking or analysis of it. The legislation as passed that created this committee only allows this committee to approve pilot projects this year during calendar year 23, and it also requires approval by Joint Fiscal Committee before the end of the year in order to move forward with a pilot project. Were you not to take action to move forward on a pilot project in that time and not to get approval by Joint Fiscal, the entire momentum and focus could be turned sideways. There could be a lot of political, non-transparent pressure to prioritize other areas of the state beyond where it would be most effective to relieve demand from public safety department's dispatch in Westminster. There could be attempts to reallocate the 11 million towards other projects even. To miss the opportunity to get pilot projects approved by just this task force and by Joint Fiscal, I submit would be a grave error and possibly put the entire initiative at risk. I know they'll need to fine-tune the dates that deliverable reports are due, and those might have to be done in either a Budget Adjustment Act or another piece of legislation. But I don't think the subject matter experts are going to have good guidance on statewide governance structure or regional governance options in time for a bill this session. I think that's going to take till April or May, and we'll miss this session. So that would be a subsequent biennium. But the need to move forward on the pilot projects and to commit funds to them necessitates, due to the late start, due to the budget veto, I think you need to consider getting data collected ahead of time. If you may not have executed contracts with subject matter experts until November sometime, and that leaves you only 30 days or so to get a pilot project conceptual plan, not an engineered plan, but a conceptual plan developed and approved by the task force and subsequently the Joint Fiscal Committee. So in order to keep momentum, in order to prove out the strategies that you adopt by selecting subject matter expert or experts, I believe you do need the pilot projects. It will focus the committee, the task force. It will focus the planning deliverables that are due. It will do, even a year out, it will do the most effective relief of Department of Public Safety dispatch load into a Rutland-Addison combined failover pilot project dispatch center, scalable to PSAPs. So every expert that I've talked to has said that that is really the only way to approach a project of this size, is to focus on a fixed geographic area and test your methodologies, test your data collection, test your workflows, and then scale it to a statewide initiative. And somehow that's it was not incorporated adequately into the RFP, and it may therefore not be adequately pitched in the proposals for fear of being disqualified by being too specific. But I have no compunction about being too specific. So that's my comments. I'm happy to get out there and collect data ahead of time to keep y'all on track if necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. I would suggest that under new business, we come back to what we've heard in public comment and have a discussion by task force members. I also think that it will organically come up in one of our future items that's already there about pilot projects and what does success look like. So somewhere between new business and the already stated agenda, I would like to hear feedback about what you just heard. Okay, looking back to the agenda, is there anyone else who would like to offer public comment? Okay, then I believe that our next item is the status of the status of the RFP for independent legal counsel. Am I correct, Sonny? Is that where we are?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so let me get, I have two different emails that I need to reference for this, so stand by. So the Attorney General's office approves contracts for legal services pursuant to Bulletin 17.10. We did, as you know, send a draft of the RFP over for the Attorney General's office to look at. And they do not approve RFPs, only a subsequent contract. They did raise concerns about the approval for the source of the funds. They read the big bill language and did not see that there was anything expressly allocated for legal services for the task force. And they suggested that we might wish to talk to joint fiscal before committing funds to a legal contract, but that would not stop us from putting an RFP on the street. So really what we have is some guidance at this point from the Attorney General's office. And the most recent update that I heard, which was just yesterday, is that we ultimately have to figure out how to pay for it. And as I said, they've recommended that we might want to talk to joint fiscal about this expenditure, but that we are free to proceed with an RFP for legal services. So that's my update. And I wonder if the task force members have feedback or if we would like to move to next steps on that RFP.
I'm good with moving to next steps on the RFP.
Yeah, so I guess what I really meant to say is I would welcome a motion to
I'll move to-
launch this RFP into the universe.
If that was a motion, I'm happy to second it.
Hey, large conference room Mike, because that's how you're showing on the screen, large conference room. Was that a motion, sir?
Yeah, that was a motion. I'll motion to release the RFP to the universe as you so eloquently put. That's perfect.
Very good. And Paul, you've seconded that motion.
Yes.
I would also welcome input from the task force members on do you concur that we should consult with the Joint Fiscal Committee? I could do that. Barb and I could do that via email. I will note, this is also somewhat related to what Mr. Whitaker was speaking to. The last regularly scheduled meeting of the Joint Fiscal Committee for the year is on November 7th. So that is not that far away. I don't know as though this request would rise to the level of needing to be on their agenda. It might be more of a, hey, we're sending this information to you. Do you perceive that there's a need for us to get formal approval, or is keeping you in the loop satisfactory based on their understanding of the big bill language? So do the task force members want me and Barb to do outreach to joint fiscal to see if they want us to be on the agenda versus just getting a email type approval to move forward with expending funds?
I would say that would be prudent.
Okay.
I agree. If we're being advised by the Attorney General's office to seek the blessing of joint fiscal, I think it would be foolish not to at least make them aware that what we're doing or planning to do anyway.
Planning to do. Okay. Very good. Then we will do that. And I will work with the procurement office to get, oh wait, that was part of the discussion. We have to take a vote. So we have a motion about releasing the RFP to the universe. We've had it properly seconded. Is there any further discussion? Okay. Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by raising your hand or saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, very good. Motion is approved. All right, the next thing on the agenda is pilot project considerations and goals. What does success look like? I would like to have my fellow task force members begin, and I have some thoughts, but I'd like to keep them towards later in the conversation.
For lack of anybody else speaking, I guess
So-
I'll go. Sorry, didn't mean to
Yep.
cut you off, Ron.
No, Paul, why don't you
Nope,
kick it off?
that's-
We'll have Ron
go
jump
ahead,
in
Paul.
after you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I will say that I think I agree with pretty much everything Steve Whitaker said, actually. I've been saying since a year ago, last year's working group, that rather than try to stand up 12 new or expand 12 regional communication centers simultaneously, that we should focus on one area of the state, try to get that up, get it successful, use it as a proof of concept, and then learn from that, our successes and failures, before we move on to other parts of the state. And as far as where to do that, my argument has been that, part of what got us here was the need to reduce the reliance on VSP for dispatching for all of these municipal departments. And so we should look at where we're going to get the biggest bang for the buck. And unless I haven't talked to Lance Burnham in almost a year, but unless things have changed drastically, I think that the biggest bang for the buck is to be had in Rutland County. But my hesitation there is I haven't heard a lot coming from Rutland County in terms of a willing host, or a lot of grassroots work being done to stand this up. So while I would like to see a pilot project take off in Rutland County, we need somebody in Rutland County who wants to host it and is willing to do the work. So that's my first point, is getting the largest reduction in reliance on VSP that we can with the first pilot project. It may involve having to stand up, as Steve alluded to, it may mean having to stand up 2 simultaneously, so that this pilot project communication center has somebody to fail over 2. Addison makes sense, but I'm not married to Addison. Second point that I would, or maybe third point, that I think what success looks like is having a governance model in place that the customer agencies are satisfied with. And by governance model, I mean, who's in charge, who calls the shots, how are decisions made, who owns the equipment, what if there's disagreement, how are the cost sharing determined. And it has to include a plan for what happens if the host stops hosting. One of the applicants last year was the Orange County Sheriff's Department. They wanted to be a regional dispatch center, and then the sheriff lost the election. The new sheriff wants nothing to do with dispatching. In fact, the communities they were dispatching for had to suddenly find a new host. So there needs to be some kind of safeguard in place. It's when you have, unfortunately, with the nature of sheriff's departments in Vermont, elections have big consequences. And I guess this is a start. I mean, the bare minimum to get this up and running, to get a pilot project on the books. And then once we are confident that it's going to succeed, then we can focus on, hardening systems, improving their coverage, and any other technology enhancements that we want to do.
Thank you, Paul. Ron, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I mean, I have a similar idea. I think that we clearly need to look at where we get our most bang for the buck, because if we're going to try to solve a problem, we're better off starting in a place that already is, for lack of a better term, a disaster, because then we're bound to improve things. And that's always a good start, making an improvement rather than struggling to convince people you've made an improvement. So The other part of that is clearly that wherever it is that we try to do this, we have to be able to get buy-in from the locals, that they need to be cooperative, because we can't run a pilot project and do it on any kind of a reasonable schedule if we're going to have to struggle to get the people who are going to benefit from the work to cooperate. That just, that's just not going to work either. So I think that whole Addison Rutland thing is probably a good place to start. I know that with respect to the communications things, Addison is easy pickings because most of the fire agencies there use the same frequency. Rutland is a bit more fragmented, but they certainly need some help down there. So tying the two projects together, I think that perhaps what we need to do is to start in one place, as Paul has suggested, and figure out the communications and the dispatching part, keeping in mind that we want to be able to fall over to one of the other regions and design the system based on that, and then build the second one once we figure out that the first model works, and then tie the two together and test the fallover part of it, and make sure that works before we try to roll the whole thing out elsewhere.
Thanks, Ron. Jim, got thoughts?
Yeah, my thing is I think Rutland would be a good spot to start with, but my question is, who wants to host it down in Rutland? We have to get over that hurdle first. And I don't care where you pick in the state, who wants to host it? And we need somebody to sit down and say they want to jump on board on this. I know we've got somebody sitting in Rutland now that could hopefully answer some of our questions.
Well, then let's turn it over to large conference room Mike.
It looks like he's
So-
the defendant sitting there.
Yeah, right. Sorry. Well, actually, in this case, I'm kind of glad everybody else went first because Paul really highlighted kind of the value proposition, and Ron and James kind of followed up, which is great. So I don't have to say too much. In discussion with my concern is having the sheriffs run this in any county, not just Rutland, because those elections change and leadership changes. Again, coming from my perspective, I do think that whether it's one large entity across the state or whether it becomes an entity for each county, perhaps, or for each dispatch location, that entity should be separate with probably a board of its own. We'll let our subject matter experts kind of guide us in that, but I don't think it should be. So, for example, my police department would be willing to host it, right? We've had this discussion. We have room on one of the floors of our building. It'd be a good spot. But the portability of not just the technology, but the people that are working there, the equipment itself, and all of that policy and organization, that would be much more portable if there was a third-party entity, so to speak, that could be subcontracted out. So what I mean by that is, think about this. If we establish and this might be overcomplicated for this point in the discussion, but if we establish, say, Rutland Dispatch LLC, or not-for-profit, or some municipality, right? And then that is the entity that is portable. And currently, the management of that, the staffing, and all of that gets subbed out to the city of Rutland, or gets subbed out maybe into the city of Addison, city of Addison, Middlebury, whatever it happens to be. I think that, and I don't mean to overcomplicate this, but having an entity that the entity itself can be as portable as the technology, as portable as the people that are working for it, might be helpful for that portability. However, to go back to the original point, I think Rutland would be absolutely willing to do this. We've talked to multiple people in the Rutland City Police Department and the Fire Department. They are on board with it as well. We already have done the built into our systems. I don't know exactly what that would look like and how we would spin it up and bring it online, but I think that there's definitely willingness in Rutland. I can't speak for Addison County.
Go ahead,
And we're in
Ron.
a good spot. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. Finish up, Mike.
was just gonna say, and we're in a great spot here in the valley because we look at multiple towers across the board that the state has access to. So being able to transmit out multiple directions is a big thing. So,
Okay, go ahead, Ron.
So I think that to add to what Mike said, I think that establishing some kind of governance model is a really good idea. I think if you want to contrast two situations, you've got the Selburne situation where the select board there sort of stepped to the plate and said, we're going to help our neighbors and we're going to establish a dispatch center, and it's going to work. The way it's going to work is it's just simply not going to cost the taxpayers of Shelburne a single penny to do dispatching for our neighbors. They got to pay their own way. And then on the other side of the coin, we've got what happened in Addison County, where Jim Coons had the sheriff's department dispatching a whole pile of fire departments for free using the money that he was taking in by housing federal prisoners. And when he passed away, his successor, let's just say there was a dramatic shift in personality and in the commitment to the community, for to be polite. And all of a sudden the thing just collapsed, and everybody ended up, out in the cold begging for people to take them into their dispatch facility. And that was just a disaster. So whatever it is that's done has to have a foundation underneath it that's not going to crumble.
Okay. Michael Wright, thoughts? Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I agree with everyone.
Yeah,
I
I
think
was
that's the underlying thing, is making sure that it's a solid foundation. And I think Rutland's a good area, but I think that there's got to be certainly some commitment there.
You have a model for a governance. Central Vermont and Chittenden County has created their own municipal entity to set up their regional dispatch operations. That's the model that's out there right now for setting up an independent organization. I don't see you being able to get that accomplished in a reasonable amount of time, because the local municipalities are going to have to vote on it, and then that's going to have to go before the legislature. So it'd have to be somebody local initially to start it out, whether it be the city of Rutland or wherever.
Yeah, in terms of timeline, it took years for enough communities to approve articles at town meeting day and build budgets that included their fair share of this. And of course, it's that very thing, the fact that it takes so long to get it going, that then people start pulling away before you ever really got out of the gate. So definitely that model is unique in that it has taxing authority, but we're talking years to get it going. Mike, what do you got?
and maybe I'm speaking out of turn here. Both, I'll speak on both pieces. The taxing authority piece, like if we could do that through the county, because everybody pays a county tax. I mean, there's maybe an opportunity there to do through the county tax an increment for that goes to every taxpayer. I don't know if that's been explored, and I'm sure Paul's been through that conversation already, at least with some folks. But maybe there's an option there, and that might simplify the ballot process, of going out to the communities. That's based directly on population density, right? So if every individual property owner is paying an increased county tax, then there's a fair share based on the property owners.
Interrupt and ask Mike if you could get closer to the mic. It's very impossible to interpret what you're saying here.
Okay. Is everybody else have a hard time hearing, or?
A little bit.
Okay.
A little bit of hard time.
That's all right.
I think if I heard you correctly, you were referencing using the county tax base, which was thoroughly explored in the Chittenden County and Central Vermont region, and it was found to not be a vehicle by which there was any statutory ability to collect a tax for this purpose, and that's why they had to create themselves as a something similar to CCTA, right? An entity that has taxing authority outside the scope of the county tax. We really basically have no county government in Vermont that has any teeth to it.
I'll shut up now.
No,
you're I
don't
think
shut up
you're-
now.
No, I mean,
Go ahead.
the county tax as it currently stands really only supports, the upkeep of the courthouse, and not the criminal courthouse, but the civil courthouse in those counties that have different courthouses, and the maintenance of the sheriff's physical office. But there's very little that county tax can really be used for without statutory change.
Right, which is not an impossibility.
Right.
And that's the option that I would go for, and if we're gonna do it, like, that could be part of our process. And again, I oversimplify things, and I tend to be very glib, but in reality, I think that if that's the right path, then we could probably push for that, especially since there's legislators that want to see this regional dispatch happen. They may be our avenue to getting that put in place as well, perhaps. But again, I wasn't there for round one.
I don't disagree. I'm going to tell you it's a freaking can of worms. And if we open a discussion in a legislative committee about establishing a county tax for this purpose, there will be 35 organizations lined up behind us saying, yeah, put a dime on each homeowner for us too, because we need to be funded by the county and da, 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 da. So it's not impossible, but I think it's going to be it would be a slippery ride. Ron, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, so I have a different take on the whole thing, and I think that we have a really good feel for how many 911 calls and dispatch calls we're making. The model that Shelburne bills us all with, although it's recently changed, is based on how much it costs to run a dispatch center divided by the average number of calls per year. And we used to get billed per a la carte, like we were buying desserts in a cafeteria, although I couldn't quite see how that worked, because if there were no calls, you still have to pay the dispatchers and keep the lights turned on. So recently it changed to a model with a 3-year running average that results in a bill, that says this is what you owe us for your dispatching for the year. But we have a pretty good idea of how many of those calls are dispatched. And I think that whole thing should be funded through the same way that the 911 system is, through a surcharge on phones, which would also be borne by people who don't own property and don't pay property taxes. Since, to be honest, a good portion of the 911 calls result from people who don't actually pay property taxes.
True enough. I can tell you that the 3-year running average is how we, back in the day, I can only speak to back in the day, we ran the Chittenden Unit for Special Investigations for at least 2 decades. And it was, I believed at the time and continue to believe, a reasonable option. One unintended consequence of that model was that sometimes communities would pressure their police departments to not refer cases to the unit because they didn't want their fair share to go up. And literally in some of these small towns, a bump up of 3 or 4 cases in a year could have a financial implication that was a struggle for them, even though it was averaged over 3 years. So any of these models that rely on or allow for pressures to not stop vehicles, pressures to not punch a card for an incident that a citizen reported because it somehow impacts a fair share, to me is counterintuitive to actually capturing the activity that's happening in our communities that requires first responders' attention. So I'm sensitive to anything that can be manipulated by not punching a card or not initiating a case on something. Go ahead, Jim.
I would agree with you. I would agree with you as it relates to law enforcement more than it does fire and EMS. We take a call for somebody having difficulty breathing, they get dispatched. There's a card there for them. So law enforcement, I have seen that over the years with some of the agencies that we've had on our police side. They either over punched cards and then all of a sudden they got hit with a bill, and then they went the other way.
Yeah.
But in the fire and EMS, I don't see that.
Right. Fair enough. I've seen in this situation where it was a la carte, where an agency opened one incident number each day for all their traffic stops and entered all their traffic stops under one incident number instead of having 13 or 15 or 20 car stop incidents. So, I mean, it's just anything that allows for fooling with the numbers to me,
Gaming.
because their fair share is reliant
Well-
on it, to me is no good.
We did that, we had the same thing here in Shelburne, but we were counting all those individual traffic stops. Even though there was one incident, we knew that there were 20 traffic stops under that one incident. We were actually capturing the traffic stops.
Yeah. Ron, what do you got?
Yeah, so I understand how you could convince the police department not to call an investigation unit, but I think that if you're going to count up 911 calls and figure out which agencies got them and all that other kind of stuff, you'd really literally have to strong arm the individual people making those calls not to call 911 to actually affect that number. It's driven by the consumers, not the individual agencies or the individual municipalities. I can't see a way for anybody to hijack that system.
Oh, well, but I think 911 drives only, Jim would have a better sense, but I would guess that 911 only constitutes about 10% of the calls for service that come into a dispatch center. They come in through school counselors, doctors' offices, DCF, self-initiated activity by cops on the street, etc.
Yeah, we have a lot of self-initiated activity. We have a lot of 7-digit non-emergency calls coming in.
Right.
For law enforcement, 911 is a very small portion. For fire and EMS, it's extremely high.
Right. Paul?
I was just going to say that this group today, we really don't need to nail down what the governance model is going to be. We just, under what does success look like, we just need to agree that there needs to be one. And our subject matter expert will help us figure out what that looks like.
Fair enough. Large conference room, Mike?
It's not gonna get I actually was about to say what Paul said. So I think the details are important. I think leveraging technology is going to help us with governance, and I think that's a big piece, right? So whether it's a fully integrated dispatch, which I know is something we've been trying to achieve for years and trying to figure out how that's going to work together. Like those pieces will help us get to a part where we'll be able to see what we can use to do that.
So yes, thank you. And I appreciate all this good conversation. I just want to put out there before we wrap up for this portion of the agenda that somewhere in the universe of consideration, we should remember that it is not impossible to contemplate that Rutland or Derby or both PSAPs come back online, or whether they have 911 seats or not, but come back as emergency communication centers. When I think about Rutland and Addison and that neck of the woods, that would relieve some pressure from the Westminster PSAP. I think we need to be thinking of a hybrid approach to this that may or may not include the state being an actor in this. It is certainly easier to establish governance in that format of having X number of state-run centers, and you as a consumer, as a client, have a contract with the state, and that the real booger there is what does equitable payment look like? That's really the big hitch with those centers. It's not how do we do the business of running a center? We know how to do that. So as we contemplate what a pilot project looks like, I don't think we should rule out having a state-run center be part of the solution.
I, for one, am happy to hear you say that. I mean, that was I won't call it a suggestion, but it was an option that came out of last year's working group, mainly thanks to Mr. What the heck's his name? The select board member from Benson that served on last year's group. And at the time, I was under the impression that the Department of Public Safety was opposed to that. But you've mentioned it a couple of times now, so it's encouraging to hear that is clearly an option still, and one that I agree should not be overlooked.
Right. I think it has to be part of the options, because for the state to stand back and say, this is what we're doing and nothing more, is not is not being a full and generous partner in this, trying to problem solve a statewide solution. So yes, I think it has to be on the table for consideration. And if the will of the consumers is not for that to be the case, that they want to do things at the local or regional level, that's fine. But I think we have to be willing to be part of the solution.
And if, I know this would be it'd be a long process, but if Derby and Rutland State Police, or Derby and Clarendon, or Derby and wherever, was suddenly back online, that might alleviate some of the urgency to stand up these regional dispatch centers. And we have regional dispatch centers that have grown sort of, I hate this term, but organically over the last couple of decades. We've ended up with Shelburne and St. Albans and Hartford that became established through no work of the state whatsoever.
That's right.
And that may continue. That just there are some communities that aren't going to want to use state police for their dispatch center for whatever reasons, and can continue to work together to create, whether it's in Rutland or whether it's in Addison or whether it's in wherever.
Right. Anything else from the task force members before we move on to the next agenda item? Okay, very good. That takes us to new business. I have an item of new business. Does anyone else have an item of new business? Okay, seeing none from task force members, my item of new business is more a question, and Paul, I think you might be able to help me navigate this. If not, I'll have to contact my legal counsel, or, since we don't have one of our own yet. This task force has chosen to enact the clause in the RFP, and we have invited the 3 bidders on the little RFP for project management to give us a presentation. That is happening next week, that the task force members are meeting with all 3 bidders to hear a presentation, and we have a set of standardized questions for them, which will assist us in making our decision around selecting a project manager for the task force. My question is, do we need to post this as a special meeting and then go into executive session? Like, it would be a continual executive session for each of the 3 presentations, which are separate and distinct Teams links, because we are sending one Teams link for vendor 1, a second one for vendor 2, a third one for vendor 3. And then would we, at the end of that, have to come back out into a public session, even if we are not making any decisions?
I think the short answer is yes.
I think so too, because we're all together.
We're all going to be there. There's clearly going to be a quorum. We're going to be conducting the business of the task force. I think, yes, we need to call a meeting to order. And then if we're going to do these interviews in executive session, then we go into executive session, we can come back out, go back into the second executive session, come back out, do the third, come back out, and then if there's any other action, and then adjourn.
Yeah, and I think that actually allows the opportunity to put on the agenda at the end action on anything decided during executive session. So if we would potentially need a 4th executive session, because one for each of the presentations, and then a 4th one for us to come together and discuss what we heard. And then at the end of that, if we have a decision that's been made, we would have to come back out into public session and vote on a motion to take that action. So, Sonny, I hope that that's clear as mud, that we will need to post a special meeting for next Tuesday, the 17th, starting at, we would want to start it at probably 10:50 a.m. and go into executive session number 1 at 11, which is when we've invited a vendor to present. And then we would leave that link. I don't know as though we need to return to public session. I think we can just proceed through the 3 separate links that all, the 4 separate links that all constitute executive session. They're just 4 private meeting spaces. And then we would come back to the public meeting at the end, which I anticipate would not be until 2:30, possibly close to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So we'd open the public portion of the meeting at 10:50 a.m. and begin the presentations at 11 a.m.
And you're
So-
going to want a separate executive session for each of the 3 presentations and then
Already
a
have them.
final.
Those links have already been established. It's the
Okay.
fourth one. The fourth one has not been established for the task force members to come back together and talk about what we just heard in the 3 presentations.
All right.
This is just a question. I don't necessarily fall one way or the other. Do we want to reserve the ability to meet briefly after each presentation before jumping right into the next?
Yes, that fourth link that is our private meeting space for the task force members could be
Right.
in and out, in and out. So
Okay.
we could set it
Okay.
up to run from 11 to 3. And we can go back and forth to it to be able to discuss or fine tune any questions.
Okay.
Okay. Any other new business items for the task force?
I forget, will Barb be back for that next week?
She will. Yep, that's her first day back.
Welcome back.
Yeah, welcome back. Okay, so that brings us to set the next meeting date and adjourn. We know that we have a special meeting set for next Tuesday. It sounds like we have some activities to undertake relative to further discussion of pilot projects and various other things. So I'm open to a suggestion for our next regular meeting date. Also putting a placeholder down, friends, that the big RFPs, I believe, are due either Friday or Monday. It might be Monday the 16th. I don't have it in front of me, but it's soon. Very soon, the big RFPs are due. I guess I better find out that date. Hold on.
I thought it was on a Friday, but I'm not.
Is
sure
it on the
exactly.
20th? Let me just go here to the.
Friday the 13th, I think.
That's Friday,
Yeah, I thought it was Friday the 13th too.
Yep.
So,
Yeah,
okay.
tomorrow.
Friday the 13th at 3 p.m.
Very good. So that means in addition to the special meeting around the little RFP to pick a project manager, we also are going to need to be reading big proposals from the big RFP and setting up time to discuss those and figure out next steps. That can be done within the context of a regular meeting and just go into executive session for that discussion. But I would suggest that we try to fit that in, if not the end of next week, early the week of the 23rd. So I don't know how anyone feels about meeting on Friday the 20th for a regular meeting of the task force that would also include an executive session to discuss what we have received for big RFP bids.
Preferably in the morning, but I'm free.
Yep. Morning is what I was thinking was 9 a.m. if folks can make that.
Works for me.
Ron?
On my calendar here. All right. What date was that?
Friday, the 20th at 9 a.m.
20th.
for a regular meeting, probably going to take the better part of 90 minutes or 90 minutes plus.
Yeah, I think the Friday the 20th is fine for me.
Okay. Mike W. Okay, what about big conference room, Mike D?
I can make that work.
Have I missed anyone? Jim said yes, Paul said yes, and we're gonna have to, Sonny, do you have access to Barb's calendar?
Yes. It looks like she is available. I can block off some time just to kind
Yep.
of keep it.
Yep, I'm gonna do the same thing right now. Hold for task force regular meeting. Okay. Okay,
You want me to
so
set it for 9 to 11?
I would have, yes, set it for that, although I hope we can wrap up in 90 minutes just because we're spending 4 hours on this topic on Tuesday, so. Okay, very good. So,
Michael Wright just said it works for him, so.
okay,
Yep.
very good. Thank you, Michael Wright. So we have meetings next Tuesday. rather lengthy meeting from 10 minutes of 11 until we're done with the presentations and any discussion. And then we will meet again on Friday, the 20th for a regular task force meeting. And by then we will have certainly distributed all the large RFP bids and you'll have had a week to digest them. Very good.
In anticipation of the request, will they do that tabulation thing for the public to see who the bidders are on the big RFP?
Yes. Yes, I will have the procurement office do that. Okay, with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thanks, Jim.
We'll second that.
Thanks, Ron. Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand.
Aye.
Very good. Mike Wright's got his hand up too, Sonny. So that is a 6-0. Motion to adjourn has passed. And with that, I will see you all on Tuesday. Thank you very much for a very productive meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks.